thighs of brass. Now we're down to the legs of iron. And Daniel says there'll be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron. Of course, we all know that fourth kingdom was the great empire of Rome. Rome reigned from 168 BC to around 476 AD. Rome was a ruthless nation. It ruled the world, as it were, with a rod of iron. God depicted Rome with legs as legs of iron, and she did rule the world as a rod of iron. Her Caesars called themselves gods. They demanded worship and obedience from all men. She was the largest and the most long-lived of all those four world empires, and she controlled the world in the days when Jesus Christ himself came to this world. Now the big question is this: who conquered Rome? Here we have Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, each one conquering each other. But the big question, friends, is this: who conquered the kingdom of Rome? Now, if you were a man and you were simply writing this out, you would say one empire comes and another empire comes, another empire comes. And when you got to Rome, you would probably say, and another empire came and conquered Rome. But when we ask ourselves the question of who conquered Rome, from history we know the answer is that no one conquered Rome. Rome simply conquered itself. It destroyed itself. Notice what the Bible says here in Daniel chapter 2, verse 41, as Daniel keeps going forward here. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. Here we find in our metal man, we're down now into the feet, and we know the feet were made of iron and clay. And Daniel interprets that. He says the kingdom will be divided. And friends, this is exactly what took place in history. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. But Rome was never conquered. It just conquered itself. It just fell to pieces. And the kingdom was divided. We find from the fallen empire of Rome, the divided nations of this world really have their foundation. Today, we have what we call modern Europe. And really, Rome broke up into what we call Europe today. That's where it came from. Rome divided. It fell apart. The iron fibers of this giant empire, which had ruled for nearly 600 years, just fell to pieces through corruption, through luxury, through greed, through moral decay. Rome lost its stability. It lost its strength. It became an easy prey for barbarian tribes. And they came in from the north, those Germanic tribes, and they began to just settle into the area of Rome, the Roman Empire. And by the year 476, when Emperor Augustus was deposed, Rome had been divided, historians tell us, into 10 segments. And that's very, very interesting, because we find on this image the feet of iron and clay and the 10 toes. Those 10 toes represent those 10 original divisions of the Roman Empire, of which it broke up into. And many of those divisions are still with us today. Those original 10 divisions were the Alemanni, the Burgundians, the Franks, the Lombards, the Saxons, the Suevi, the Visigoths, the Heruli, Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. Now, 7 of those powers are with us today. The Alemanni are the Germans, the Burgundians, the Swiss, the Franks, the French, the Lombards, the Italians, the Saxons, the English, the Suevi is Portuguese, Visigoth is Spanish. But 3 of those powers were destroyed. The Heruli, Vandals, and the Ostrogoths, they are extinct. And we're going to find out more about that in our up-and-coming lecture. But the modern nations of Europe today really developed from the disintegration of the Roman Empire. Some were weak, some were strong. But notice as it goes on now what Daniel has to say in verse 43. Talking about the feet and the toes of iron and clay, he says, "And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." Ever since 476, when those original 10 tribes were put in place, were in place, many have come along trying to weld the world back together, but they've never succeeded. Why? Is because God said they shall not cleave one to another. The same as iron and clay don't mingle together and become strong. The divided nations of Europe, the divided nations of the world would never become strong. They would never mingle together. They will not cleave one to the other. The Bible tells us that men would come along and try and weld the world back together. Have a world empire. But friends, it's never taken place. And it never will take place as such, because the Bible says that they shall not cleave one to the other. God said Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, Rome, then there would be the divided nations of this world. They would not cleave one to another. And people have tried. As we go back through history, we find that people tried to get the Roman Empire back together. There was people like King Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Empire, tried to gather the world back together. He failed. Richard I, or better known as Richard the Lionheart, he tried to have a kingdom where it was like the old Roman Empire. He failed. Of course, there was a man we all know fairly well, I think, Napoleon Bonaparte. What was his goal? What was his wars all about? It was all about gathering the world, gathering Europe back into one nation. You know, Napoleon Bonaparte actually said this. He said, I wanted to found a European system. There would have been but one people throughout Europe. Europe would soon have become one nation. People trying to gather it all back together, but God said, they shall not cleave one to the other. There will be divided kingdoms of the world. And friends, what God said is exactly what we see take place. Another person that tried to get peace and bring the empire back together was Queen Victoria. You know, in Daniel 2 verse 43, we read just before, it said, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Now what does that mean? They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. What that basically means is intermarriage between different nations. And Queen Victoria, some of the kings and queens of England were very good at trying to bring the empire back together, to bring the different nations back together by intermarrying their sons and daughters with other kings and queens and princes and so forth of other nations. Exactly what the Bible said would take place. They'll mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to the other. There's a statement from a book here which I appreciate, by Uriah Smith. It says, to avert future conflicts, benevolent rulers resorted to the expedient of intermarriage to ensure peace, until by the opening of the 20th century, it was asserted that every ranking hereditary ruler of Europe was related to the British royal family. Mingling the seed together, trying to get peace. But friends, we find that just as prophecy said would take place, they are not united together. Then we come a bit closer to home. World War I, what was it all about really? Gathering a world empire together, wasn't it? Kaiser Wilhelm tried to gather the world under his